things. I expect some more persons to join us, so I will go ahead. But guys, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our final session of Goalside Reporters 2.0. Very happy that you have joined us. Dylan, welcome. We're just starting up. And I'm going to do a quick introduction of our guest today. Her name is Miss Marsha Boyce. She is a seasoned communication specialist, born, grown, and working in Barbados. She has a strong focus on sports media and public relations, and has worked with organizations like the Barbados Olympic Association, the Barbados Gymnastic Association, and leading media training workshops and serving as a Masters of Ceremonies at several major sporting events. In her role as chairperson on the Gender Equality Commission, she advocates for the inclusivity and equity in sports. Marsha also contributes to academia, sharing her expertise with students in sports and events management program, and her work bridges gaps between media, education, and advocacy, making her a respected voice in Caribbean sports communication. I found Marsha, I don't remember how I found you, Marsha, but I mean, it's hard to find it wasn't hard to find what I was looking for when we reached out, or to at least say, yeah, this is somewhere I think that would be good to speak to persons interested in the field. And to our Goalside reporters, this session will be not just focused on journalism, although Marsha has journalistic experience, but communication in sports. So a lot of the dealing with promoting sports events, promoting athletes, communicate and setting up communications to do any kind of sporting arrangement. She will do a way better job than I am at talking about these things, but it is a very useful and good bonus to everything that we've been learning so far in the program. Before I get started, I mean, I'm probably going to skip the icebreaker. I feel like we've burned up enough time, but I would love to hear from Marsha, based on what you're going to present to us. And if there's anything else you want to tell us about yourself, please go ahead and do so. Before we go, and just let us know what the protocol is for asking questions. If we should raise our hand and unmute ourselves, or if you want us to type, you can just let us know and we will do that. All right. So I'm over to you now, Marsha.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that introduction, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Looking forward to this session. As Andrew mentioned, we want the session to be interactive, so definitely to ask your questions. You can do whichever means is comfortable for you. Either raise your hand or put the information in the chat. If I don't happen to see it while I'm speaking, I'm sure Andrew or Jessica would let me know. If I go too quickly, again, let me know as well, because sometimes, we can get a bit excited and the accent might kick in a little bit. So if I'm going quickly, you can let me know. Just a quick question I want to throw to you, quick icebreaker. If you could work for any sporting organization in the world, what organization would it be and why? I think Brian already has his in mind. Yes, go right ahead, Brian.
I would choose ESPN. I think they're very connected to most of the sports around the world, and they have a great relationship with the Caribbean. They have a very Caribbean-centric channel or department, I would say. So I think ESPN would be a great choice.
Great. What about you, Kamoya? If you could work for any sporting organization in the world, which one would it be?
Kamoya, that's for you. Unmute.
I don't really keep up with the sport organization, but I do keep up with sports. So
okay.
When I see them at my school, I'll just go and watch it. Like that.
Okay, cool. All right, Dylan, go right ahead.
I would want to make my own sports organization.
Ooh,
but
like
if I had the chance, it would be Sports Max.
Okay, nice. And hold on to that thought about, starting your own sport organization, because the Caribbean is definitely ripe for that kind of entrepreneurship in sport. There are not many places you can work in the Caribbean in sport, so sometimes you might have to create, the space for yourself. Yes, Andrew.
I want to work for the biggest party in sports, the Cricket West Indies.
Are you sure?
Well, once I attend all the games, I think cricket
Okay.
is fun, and I love the culture.
Okay, for me, it would be Manchester United. I'm a Manchester United fan. So to work in communications at Manchester United would be, something I would definitely look forward to. Okay, great. So guys, I'm just going to start to share my screen. I'll have some slides to guide us as we go through today, looking at, sport communication. Firstly, to give you a sense of what that entails, as well as some of the things you can look out for, some of the expectations and so forth. Great. So I'll just skip over the introduction and so forth because we would have already done that. So there's a summary of what we'll be looking at: an introduction to sport communication, some of the key areas that we're going to touch on, some examples of what working in sport communication will look like, as well as some helpful tips. So my first question to you guys, the statement says communication and public relations in sport is important. Do you agree or disagree? And if you agree or disagree, you need to tell me why. Do you agree or disagree? Is communication in sport important? Now, Andrew says he agrees. Anybody else?
I agree. I think communication in sport is really important just to popularize sport, help the games grow and things like that.
Yep, definitely. And we're going to see some examples of how that importance plays out. But ultimately, what we want to take away is that when we're talking about sport communication, sometimes you immediately think about media, but it's really so much more than that. Essentially, any kind of information sharing as it relates to sport, through sport, or about sport. So any means of communicating, any means of interacting, anything related to sport interaction can fall under this communication heading. And media, or interacting with the media, is just one aspect of that. Sorry, just looking at. Yes, Andrew, just looking at your comment, definitely. Chronicling, our achievements is important. And one of the major aims of sport communication in general is all about creating a positive image for the organization. You're trying to attract interest in something, you're trying to create awareness about something, because even if you have a really good sport and nobody knows about it, then they can't come and watch, they can't participate, they can't take part, they can't buy your tickets and so forth. So communication then becomes really, really important, especially when you think about, you probably would have heard throughout your session, sport is $1 billion industry. There's lots of money to be made in sport, but a big chunk, if not the majority of that money, is made through the communications arm. When you think about it, from broadcast rights and by extension through sponsorship. And all sponsorship is a company using sport to communicate to an audience about their product. So essentially, we could say, that $1 billion industry is rooted in communication when we're talking about sport. Breaking it down a little bit further now. So you have that overall sport communication heading. And then under that, one of the subsets is public relations. And even within that subset, you get, some different categories. Almost any stakeholder that can have an impact on sport can be considered a key group or a key public, as you would call it in academia, that you would want to communicate with. But a lot of what we do on a database would fall in the first two categories: media relations and community relations. So I'm going to spend most of the time there as well. But just so you will get a sense of, the larger the organization, then the more groups you have to cater to. So when you think about professional sport, where they have investors, where they have donors, you have to communicate with government officials, etc. There will be dedicated arms in those organizations dealing specifically with those groups. But ultimately, you want to build good relationships. You want people to have a good perception of your organization, or to have a good perception of you, let's say if you're an athlete. And the difference here between media relations and what reporters do, and you would have spent a lot of time talking about, the job of reporters, etc., is that your focus as a sport communications professional or as a public relations professional is to make the organization look good. So while reporters are focused on news gathering, information gathering, etc., your main focus is making the organization look good, sharing information about the organization, putting the organization in the best positive light, the best possible light, and obviously a positive light. And sometimes that might lead to some conflicts between the organization and journalists, because the journalists might want a particular story and they're going down a particular angle, especially if it's negative. But your job is to present your organization in the best possible light. Sometimes that might mean withholding aspects of information that journalists might want. So it's about learning how to strike that happy medium of meeting journalist requirements, but still protecting the image, brand, and reputation of your organization. And this is just a diagram. It's an older diagram, but it just gives you a sense of how some of the things are connected, how some of the things can play out. So you're dealing with teams, you're dealing with leagues, you're dealing with players themselves, stores, brands, corporations, and so forth. And if at any point in time you want to add a comment or have a question, feel free to jump right in. Before I return to media relations, I just want to spend a quick second on community relations, because I think in the Caribbean, this is an area that we don't necessarily do a lot of in sport for sporting organizations, and it is really a valuable PR tool. So what community relations is basically, now you're not trying to interact with the media per se. You're really trying to establish good relationships with the community within which you operate. So that might be your physical community, where your club, where your stadium, where your organization might be located, or it might be your virtual space, whether, you might be an organization, let's say based in Portmore, but you have a national following. So your community then would extend nationally. How do you go about getting people to support you? How do you go about creating a positive image? This is where community relations comes in, because there are other things outside of actual sport that you can do to impact the image of your organization. So yes, performing well works. If you're winning, everybody loves a winning team or a winning athlete, so it's easy to get support. But there are other things that you can do. And giving back to your community is one of the key areas where through which you can communicate directly to these stakeholders. So this is just some examples of community relations activities that we see in a global space. So it might be creating programs that cater specifically to groups. So US Women, for example, yes, Brian, NBA Cares is a perfect example of this kind of activity. We're away from sport. They use the NBA Cares program to communicate, to relate, and to build relationships with members of the community. And these, like US Women, they had to learn to swim. The Sky had a women's leadership program. Chelsea, at one point, when there was an issue with racism and anti-Semitism, they launched a whole program building bridges aimed at tackling this. But it doesn't even have to be something this grand. It could be something as simple as a beach or a community cleanup. It could be a homework program. It could be, before school is ready to start back, the football team goes into the school closest to the community. They do some debushing, they help with painting, etc. Any kind of activity that helps to, because what it does, it humanizes the organization, and it gives people who might not necessarily be sports fans another reason to like you, another reason to engage with you. Andrew, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I did. I was bringing up the fact that when the Messi and the football team from Miami came down, they actually did some workshops with some schools. So the players were there with the teams in I think the prep school or some clubs. Mm-hmm. That could be seen as a part of the outreach.
Definitely.
Yeah. It happens all the time. You just probably don't realize that it is strategic.
What it is, exactly. It is very strategic. Because two, from an organization perspective, it isn't a case of, you just come into the country, play football and leave. You're making a lasting positive impact. Then for the students that they interact with, in some cases, you're developing now a lifelong fan because you had the opportunity to meet your favorite player or a player from this team, somebody who might have never really, thought about Miami FC before. Now, because, they came to my school. Oh, I remember the day. So you build those kind of relationships. Johan Blake, his Boys Foundation is another good example of that from an individual perspective. You have Shelley and Fraser Price with her Pocket Rocket Foundation. These are all community relations activities where through sport you can give back and help to make a positive impact on your community as well. So just something to think about. But now moving further into working in sport communications and what it can look like. A lot of it surrounds media relations, and why that is so, there's really what we like to call a symbiotic relationship between sport and the media. They're very intertwined. They depend on each other. The media needs sport for content. Sport needs the media to get their message out, to broadcast, etc. And emphasis here then is on building those relationships, especially in our environment. When you think about a lot of national sports federations, so the JFF, the J3As, netball, etc., a lot of sporting organizations will rely on the media to get their message out there. So it's really a symbiotic relationship. So as we go deeper into looking at media relations, I just want to show you a quick video of what this could look like at the highest level. This is an example of the Golden State Warriors and their behind the scenes with their head of media management from a couple years ago. The video might lag a bit, but hopefully it will be good enough for you to pick up what is being said and get a good understanding.
The Warriors are widely regarded as the premier organization in all of sports, and that compliment extends far beyond the court.
Love us or hate us, people want to watch the Warriors, want to hear about the Warriors, can't get enough content about us. And it's neat to be in that position where you're looked at as kind of like the fulcrum of everything in the NBA this day and age.
The space isn't big enough in the Warriors locker room. These days, you need an airplane hangar to accommodate the media.
All the other 3 years you've had,
hundreds of credentialed reporters, 15 players. You do the math.
You can make an argument we're the biggest story in sports right now.
Raymond Ritter is the Warriors' vice president of communications. While Golden State is trying to win a title, Ritter and his crew took home the hardware for the best PR staff in the league. And believe me, they earned it.
On a typical week, I may get 30 requests for Steph Curry to go on every, 20 different radio stations around the country to sit down with maybe Channel 5 or ESPN or CNN. So my job is to make sure I get enough publicity for him and the Warriors, but also realize his number one job is to help us win basketball games, and I can't overextend him. And we've had a good happy meeting where he knows if I go to him with a request, that it's something I really need him to do.
There is mutual respect between the players and the PR team. They get it, and they have fun with it.
They're acting in the locker room a little bit, which is the law that should not be broken. They're not allowed in there, but we got a good rapport with them, so they flash in and out a couple seconds here and there. So you like those guys? They have some tough jobs, right? All grabbing the players, making sure that they're doing all the media. We don't want to do media every day. Some guys don't want to do it, but it's part of the game. And we have a great PR staff. They do a great job of what they do. We're happy to have them.
When the game ends, the real job begins. The media team directs players to TV, radio, press conference, and my favorite, the locker room scrum. It helps that Ritter began his career with the Lakers during Showtime, when the biggest names in basketball were in Southern California.
Have the opportunity to work with Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant, all the national media, and the attention we had on us put me in a position to be able to handle what we're doing today.
So that's just an example of what, working in sport communications and media relations at the highest level could be like, where in your previous sessions, you would have heard from the journalist perspective, what they need, what they require, best practices, etc. So now on this end, you're the one who is creating the environment for all of that to happen. You're the one who is setting up the interviews. You're the one who is setting up the news conferences. You're the one who are scheduling players for interviews and so forth. It's almost like the puppet master, so to speak, making sure everything is in place so that reporters have the ability to do their job. It can be pretty exciting. And somebody wanted to say something. Sorry,
Marsha, I was just going to comment on this is a PR piece for the PR people.
basically, yeah, basically. And if you think about it, as a sport communications person, there are sport communications awards you can win for how well you do your job. But definitely you can see then there are so many moving parts that have to come together for journalists to be able to do their job. So then looking at some of the things you would have spoken about in terms of what journalists require, what they need, etc. There are certain key tools if you're working in sport communication that you really want to be able to make the best of them. So one of the biggest things is knowing what is newsworthy. That will be the most important thing. If you know or have an understanding of the things that journalists will be interested in, then it becomes easier for you to basically pitch or sell that content to them to get them to cover your events, to cover your organization, to report on your athlete, etc. So having an understanding of what is newsworthy is very, very important, because then you essentially help to make the journalist's life a lot easier. So if you're sending out a news release, you're holding a news conference, you want to make sure that what you're actually saying or what you're planning to say is important, and important enough that people would want to cover it. And ideally, you don't want to wait for journalists to go digging and asking the right questions to the wrong people, because they will find the wrong people to ask those questions to. So ultimately, as a sport communication professional, the aim is to be able to provide journalists with the information that they will be requiring to be interactive and proactive. Sometimes you find, for example, when everything is good, you can find everybody to talk to. You can find the president, the athletes, etc. When things are not going so well, nobody wants to talk. And that doesn't lead to good relationships. You want to strike a happy medium. So sometimes before the team leaves, let's say to go Carifta, there's a big airport send-off. Everybody wants to talk. If the team underperforms, you kind of sneak back into the country. Nobody wants to talk. And as an organization, you really want to interact with the media, good or bad. Because if you build those relationships, then it kind of ensures that you get even more favorable coverage, essentially, when you build those relationships. So some of the things that you want to make sure, or some of the skills you want to consider, is you want to be able to write a good news release, and we're going to touch on that in a moment. Organizing and executing news conferences will be another big part of your day-to-day job. It's one of the things that you do. Being able to compile a media kit and a media guide, I'm going to touch on that in a moment. Being able to create relevant fact sheets. So as Andrew mentioned, that record keeping becomes very, very, very important. Too often our sporting organizations are not able to tell you, the number of members they actually have, the number of players they actually have, the record of Premier League winners for the last 20, 30 years. Having that information compiled into hand makes the difference between an okay organization and a great organization. And it also makes the work of a journalist much easier if you can get that information directly from an organization. Being effectively interviewed and being able to do interviews are important skills. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. And learning the various tricks of the trade, understanding that, reporters are out to get the news. They're out to get the story. But your job is to protect the image of your organization. So sometimes a no comment might be necessary. But one of the biggest takeaways here too, in terms of tricks of the trade, nothing is ever off the record. They might say it is off the record, but unless you have a very personal, well-established relationship with a particular journalist, always operate as if nothing is off the record. There might always be a phone recording. There might be a camera recording. Somebody might be making notes. Always operate as if anytime you speak to a journalist whatever you might say could become news. And that's a really good starting point to operate from. So what can sport communications look like from an organization or athlete perspective? It can include interviews. So you might find yourself now, similarly, how journalists do interviews, working within an organization, you might actually be conducting interviews for your organization to create content. So the skills are pretty much the same, being able to ask the right questions, being able to set the context, being able to be personable and get people to talk, especially athletes. Because oftentimes the organization tells its own story the best. You know, you're the best person to tell your own story. So being able to do interviews in terms of conducting them, but also being able to interview well. As a sport communications professional, one of the things, or one of the key aspects of your job is preparing others to do interviews. So conducting training for your athletes, conducting training for your officials and your administrators. Practice becomes a very important part of your role, especially when it comes to athletes, because for me, I like to say, the same way we prepare athletes to compete on the field, we prepare them with drills, we prepare them with eating right, we prepare them with strength and conditioning. Doing media interviews is essentially a part of their tasks, and we need to prepare them effectively as well. So that's why I like to work with young athletes in particular to help prepare them, because this is a part of, you know, being involved in sport. It's just not only what you do on the field or on the court as well. So this is a very important point. You would have heard journalists speaking about getting news from news releases. So where do these releases come from? This is a part of your job, writing these news releases. And this is one of the most common ways where organizations or athletes might interact with the media. So now you are the one preparing the content for journalists, but those same tenets would apply. You want to make sure that the information is accurate. You want to make sure that the information is concise, but you also want it to be attention grabbing, and you want it to be well written, because ultimately an effective news release is basically written exactly like a news story. If you think about it, you are basically writing a news story for your organization. And what you want is for that news release to be carried in the media verbatim, that they don't have to make any changes. They can just take it from your email and put it in the paper, or take it from the email and run with it on air. Because that is what you're aiming for, then some of the tenets, what we like to call the 4 C's. You want to be clear, you want to be concise, you want to be correct, and you want it to be complete. Give a full picture of what it is you're trying to say. You would have heard the reporters talking about, you know, getting news from news conferences and attending news conferences. So from a sport communication perspective now, as the organization or even as an athlete, you would now be the ones organizing those news conferences, managing those news conferences, where journalists and reporters would gather to get that information from you. Has anybody in the group had any experience with attending a news conference or watching a news conference? You can put it in the chat. Yes. Andrew, you've attended or been a part of the panel?
Attended. I was a part. Yeah, attended. I've been a part of news conference, but I wouldn't call it sports.
Okay.
In the strict sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dylan has watched some. Okay. So basically, in terms of the typical structure, what you will have is, as you see here, some kind of head table and so forth. So the principal speakers, whether they're players, administrators, athletes, etc., would sit behind this table. There would be oftentimes the communications officer, manager, etc., would be the one performing MC duties. They would open up the conference, welcome everybody. Initial statements will be made by the speakers at the head table, and then we open the floor for question and answer from members of the media. And that's basically the typical flow. Sometimes it might be about a specific event. So for example, the photo on the left, this was when the CONCACAF president visited Jamaica last year. The photo on the right was a few years ago during the World Cup press conference. So it could be around a specific event. It could be pre-match. It could be post-match. Depending on the nature of the sport, some sports have mandatory press conferences as well. So if you think about, for those who might be tennis fans, if you watch Davis Cup, they have 3 mandatory press conferences. There are 2 before the event that must feature all of the players, as well as after the event. For football, like Premier League football, etc., usually before the day before the match, press conferences are held. These are mandatory press conferences that must be held. For football at the CONCACAF FIFA level, a news conference must be held after every match where at least one player and the coach must be available. So some of these things aren't optional depending on the sport. They are a part and parcel of the regulations, and it will be your job to help manage, set up, and guide these kinds of procedures. And when we're talking about fact sheets or media kits, this is where that additional work comes in. There's some additional elements, whether you might need to prepare bios or biographies. You might have a copy of the speeches from the different speakers. In a pre-match scenario, you might have a copy of the team sheets available for reporters and so forth. If it's a news conference announcing the start of a league season, then you'll need your schedules, your fixtures, your agenda. All of that kind of information would make up your media kit for a news conference. So again, lots of moving parts, but the aim is to try to provide journalists with everything they would need to effectively cover whatever the story is about your organization or your team. Another key aspect of sport communications is storytelling and crafting the organization's image. So now this goes beyond interacting with the media or creating a positive environment for journalists. Now you get to speak, directly to fans, directly to your various stakeholders, to present the organization or an athlete in in a way that you would want your organization to be represented in. So I'll just show you a quick video that Manchester United did as part of their communication tools for the launch of their new stadium plans.
Sorry about that.
Manchester, a city, a stadium, a skyline, risen together. Manchester and United, forever entwined. Youth, courage, success in our blood. A glorious history, a future to be written. Where workers once grafted, a new landmark will rise. A new theatre for dreams to come alive. A design inspired by the Red Devil's trident. A modern take on our industrial roots. 100,000 fans, united as one. A place for glory, a place for pride. A sea of red, the loudest crowd. A majestic arena where history and future collide. A public space, a focal point, a catalyst for renewal, full of hope for our fans and community. A new home for United, a new place for Manchester, a new future on familiar ground.
Nice. Is that the launching of their new stadium?
Yeah, that's the plans and stuff they're going with. And what that did in the build-up, there was a lot of negative pushback in terms of where we're spending, billions of dollars. The fans right now aren't happy with the club. So a piece like this is very important because it sets the tone, it creates the imagery, it taps into the emotion. It helps to build on, we were a club with all of the glory before, and now with this new venue, we can get back there. So as a communications piece, for those now who might not be interested in, let's say, what we call hard news, but might be interested in the storytelling, the drama, the imagery, the colors, etc. Writing a particular narrative. There is an arm of sport communications for you. And Dylan, I'm seeing your comment in terms of, yes, news conferences ahead of the Diamond League. And what that also does, if you think about it, it helps to build hype for an event. Sometimes it helps to establish a rivalry. You know, sometimes the athletes might jab at each other and it makes it seem like, oh, this is what you're saying. Okay, cool. I gotta watch this race to see how this showdown will go, etc. So all of these tools are very important outside of just building awareness and, you know, communicating information. There are other secondary benefits for some of these things as well. So definitely, even though it is not always the case, depending on your role or the type of organization you are working with, sport communications can include working directly with athletes and in different roles. So the picture on the left, the gentleman who's pointing, he was the media manager for Cricket West Indies at the time, Philip Spooner. So his job was to prepare athletes for the interviews, prepare them for the news conferences, manage those news conferences. If a reporter asks a question that could be considered controversial or out of timing, you know, he can pull it back and say, okay, guys, that's enough for today, etc. And then there's the other side of it, kind of like what I do in terms of preparing athletes to manage the media, preparing athletes to operate effectively in these kind of circumstances, helping them to get comfortable doing interviews and news conferences and navigating these kinds of situations. So if you ever get the opportunity to work in an organization, these are things that you can consider implementing, you know, putting things in place to really help your athletes develop. I'm just going to speed up a little bit because I realize I'm a little bit behind time.
I see
But
Brian.
in this role, sorry? Yes, Brian, go ahead.
I was just wondering, how does sports communications work as it relates to marketing the athletes?
So that's a very good question. There is lots of overlap, especially now because a lot of things are based in the digital realm. And a lot of that kind of marketing is done on social media, etc. There is a lot of overlapping. So when you think about marketing an athlete, let's say a high-profile athlete might have a very full team. So they might have an agent, they'll have a coach, a manager, etc. The person who manages their social media might be different from the person who manages, they might have what we call a publicist who manages their media appearances specifically, or a media manager. Whereas in some instances, those roles might all lie with one individual who is handling the marketing, handling the engagements, handling the media appearances and interviews, doing all of the bookings, managing all of the movements, hotel, travel, etc. So there is a lot of overlap, especially depending on the larger the athlete, the more separated it could be, or the more high profile the athlete is. I don't want to say smaller the athlete, but in a lot of cases, it might be one person managing all of those roles, one person helping the athlete to prepare, one person guiding them as to what to post on social media. In some cases, some of the social media accounts that you see, the athletes don't even touch them. There's an individual who's running that social media account for them, who's posting all of the pictures, who's doing all of the captions, etc., who's paid to do that, creating all of the content for them. In some cases, an athlete might have a media manager specifically who will handle all of their media appearances and so forth. And I guess that brings us to social media. Increasingly, because of the pervasiveness of social media, a lot of the sport communications work will lie in the social media space. So much so that the larger the organization, digital and social media can be a department in and of itself, separate from communications. So you'll find that some of the largest organizations might have their core communications divisions that will deal with internal communication specifically. They'll have a media relations division that will handle media relations stuff. And then they might have a digital or social media division that handles exclusively communications for social media and digital. But there must be overlap. There must be synergies, because everything that these organizations do is very strategic in nature. So there must be consistency across all the different mechanisms. So you wouldn't want a case where your president is saying one thing in an interview, but the post on social media for the organization is contradictory. So even if they're different departments, there needs to be harmony in terms of what will the overall messaging be for the organization. What is it that we're trying to communicate? And then you break it down for the different platforms. Social media as a tool is very important for sport organizations, especially small organizations in the Caribbean. Why? Because it is very cost effective. So for those who don't have a massive advertising budget, you can get a lot of reach for your organization or as an athlete through social media. And what it does increasingly is, in the past, your only way of reaching your fans was through traditional media. So you had to hope that the media came to your event, reported on it, and then either publish it in the newspaper or carried it on television or the radio. That's the only way, unless people were there that they would know this thing happened. Now, with the advent and pervasiveness of social media, you are not beholden to traditional media. So it really lessens that reliance on traditional media. So it doesn't even matter now to an extent if the media covers your event, because now you can put out that content yourself directly to your fan base. And sometimes if you've created a good enough fan base, then you might get more reach than somebody watching it on the TVJ news, because your core demographic might not be watching TVJ on the night, whereas your core demographic, which might be made up of your thousands of followers, get the news directly from you, from your social media platforms. What we're also seeing now from an athlete perspective, that a lot more athletes are breaking their own news themselves on their social media pages. So before, the news would break a story about a transfer or an athlete moving from one organization to another, etc. Now, an athlete can announce that news themselves directly to their fan base over their own platforms. Yes, Brian, like Tom Brady doing his own retirement. Similarly, Roger Federer. Roger Federer had a full campaign across multiple social media pages. So you now get to tell your story exactly as you want it to be told. Yes, there will be analysis, etc., from the media after, but in that moment, social media allows you as an athlete or an organization to control the narrative. So this is increasingly becoming a major, major role for sport organizations in communications and so forth. Then another key area is creating content for websites, newsletters, apps, etc. And this content might be different from your social media content. This can be written, it can be video. So organizations like CONCACAF will have dedicated communication staff whose job is almost like you're functioning as a reporter within the organization. So you're covering the events, you're writing the stories for the specific purpose of putting this content on the organization's website. So for someone who might be journalistically inclined, but not necessarily want to work at a television or radio station, being a part of the in-house media team for an organization is another outlet where you can use all of those skills and have the content on the organization's website where, fans, stakeholders, everybody can tune in and get the content that way. Graphics, for those who might be artistically inclined, designing graphics, designing images, especially for major events. There are persons whose sole job is to create all of the graphics so that at a moment's notice, as soon as something happens, boom, there's a graphic ready to go. So if you watch like Premier League football and you follow the social media channels, every time a goal is scored or anytime something monumental happens, boom, a graphic comes out on X or Instagram. These again are dedicated roles. So you may not be someone who likes to write, etc., but design and artistic interests might be where you like. So creating graphics and that kind of stuff is a good place to be. Sport communication can also include managing a crisis. And a crisis is really any threat to an organization or entity's image, reputation, or perception, really anything that could potentially harm the organization. Can you think about any crises that you might know of that happened in sport, whether locally, regionally, internationally?
Deflategate.
Yes, Deflategate for NFL fans. Anybody else? And the type of crisis could, or I should say, what constitutes a crisis might differ depending on the size of an organization.
And for those of you who don't know Deflategate, they were accusing Tom Brady and his team of deflating the ball in the game
Mhm.
so that it can be easier to catch, I guess.
Yeah.
Something like that. Crazy.
Yes, Brian.
The rape allegations against Mason Greenwood from Manchester United.
Yes, definitely. That was a crisis for Manchester United. They had to put out statements. Eventually, the club and the player parted ways, etc.
This was Green.
Yes, Mason Greenwood. Brian says Manchester City's 115 charges still unfolding. That's almost like a crisis waiting to happen, because depending on the rulings, that will determine, if it's a case where points are eventually docked, then is it a relegation situation? So a crisis potentially brewing, but all of these things can be crisis situations for an organization. So you might have a stadium disaster where you might be having an event and, there's a crush, people are trampled, there's a stampede, or stand might collapse, that kind of stuff. Failures in organizational management, we're seeing a lot of that. When you hear about corruption in sport, you guys might be a bit too young to be in the thick of things. When FIFA had their whole cash for vote scandal, and that really changed the way, that led to whole reforms in terms of how things are done, how World Cups are awarded. Yes, FIFA and Sepp Blatter, and up to this day, because I think last month part of that case was still in the law court, and this is something more than 10 years later, something that's still ongoing.
I think they said FIFA was the most corrupt organization. Their book, I have 2 books on just the corruption at FIFA. So
and it shouldn't be lost on us that, one of the richest sporting organizations is actually one of the most corrupt. It's almost like the two might go hand in hand. Various scandals, whether it's athlete behavior, drug use, athletes testing positive for a particular substance. You might have a case like the NFL has a domestic violence problem with athletes finding themselves in trouble for domestic violence. For those who might be familiar with gymnastics, we had the sexual harassment and abuse scandal with Larry Nassar. So sport is not immune to the ills that can happen in society. Basically, anything that can happen in regular society can happen in sport. And as a sport communication professional, you really need to be prepared in terms of being able to manage this crisis. And some of the skills required here, the aim is to react quickly. You want to limit the damage as much as possible, and you want to be able to control the narrative. Yes, I don't know if I should pronounce your name, Lily. All of these are examples of crises that can occur and some of the things that are required. So even like FIFA, for example, they have what they call like a crisis management Bible, which is about this thick, a thick book, where they've tried to, for all of their World Cup tournaments, they've tried to preempt every possible thing that could happen in and surrounding the sport so that they would have a prepared response for it. So it might be something related to the game itself, related to, let's say, a scandal popping up. It might be something related to the country that the game might be in. It might be something related to health, like if there's another pandemic or some kind of infectious disease that spreads during the tournament. For every possible scenario you can think about, FIFA's crisis communication guide has almost like a guideline how to address it. So this is how big this thing can get. That depending on the nature of the organization. Crisis
sports washing.
A role in itself. Sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
Sorry, I saw the sports washing. That is fascinating to me. It is a form of Saudi PR, as well as, I guess, there are other persons or other entities who would want to highlight it as sports washing, as you say. Can you tell us very quickly a little bit about that?
So basically, if you think about when you wash something, you try to clean it, right? So the term sport washing comes about when countries use sport to kind of clean up their image or to kind of present themselves to the world in a more positive light. And sport is one of the most effective, easiest ways to do it, especially global sport. So not only Saudi Arabia, you can go back even Russia. Russia's hosting of the Winter Olympic Games and the FIFA World Cup. If you were in Russia during those events, you would not believe it is the same country. Similarly, Qatar and the 2022 World Cup. And you're seeing more of that now with the Saudis, bidding for Olympics, bidding for almost every major games. They're hosting the eSport Olympics as well, because golf tournaments, etc. Because what it does then, even to some extent, there are folks who say, the Beijing Olympic Games did similar for China, because it changed the perception of how you are viewed, because now you get to see the country in a different light from what is the common narrative.
Oh,
so
God.
yes.
I just to add to that, I was fortunate enough to be in Beijing for the Olympics and got there a day or so before the opening ceremony, and you could not see the sun. And it was so polluted. I mentioned it to one of them, but these are people that live in Beijing. They think it's fine. And this girl, she's young, and she started crying. She was like, "Oh my goodness, you think our country is dirty?" Anyways, in 2 days it was clean. They see the clouds, that they did what they need to do, and they made it rain, and it was crystal clear. But it was a big show, and they still have the best opening ceremony object. The last one was really good, but it was such a spectacle. It was amazing, and you forget about human rights abuses, children working in factories.
You forget about all of the migrant labor and the aggressions once the sport starts. So that's where sport washing comes in. And you can kind of look out for it to see which countries are using sport, because it really is essentially at the heart of it a communications tool. Using sport to enhance the image of your country or change the perception that people have of your country. And some do it very, very successfully. Andrew, you mentioned the opening ceremony and so forth, and that's another part of sport communications for major events, managing all of the communication activities and related to these types of events. So the images you see here, the one on the left was from Pan Am Games in 2019. The one in the middle was World Championships in 2022, the two at the side. Where as an organization now, you are the ones creating the spaces, ensuring that all of the journalistic requirements are met, whether it's in a mixed zone, providing seating, providing monitors, providing all of the things they will need to effectively cover this event. All of the signage that will be required, all of the interview spaces, providing all of the information, accreditation, etc. As a sporting organization now, when you're hosting a major event, these are all activities that need to be taken care of, because you got to keep media people happy, because they will be the ones, selling your event to the rest of the world. This was from Pan Am Games in 2023. So Pan Am Sport, what they did, they basically even created their own studio on location at one of the venues. So yes, there were mainstream reporters and so forth doing it, but they also decided, hey, we're going to do it for ourselves as well, because Pan Am Sport has their own channel. They have content they need, they have time they need to fill. So they created their own studio, they had their own broadcast, they did their own live streams on their own channels. So persons working in this setup were essentially reporters and broadcasters for Pan Am Sport, and not necessarily a media organization. And you're seeing a lot more of this now, where organizations are having their own in-house broadcast teams, especially if they have live streams or streaming platforms, YouTube pages, etc. They create their own content to, I guess, supplement. Because what happens then too, you find, and CSC Games is planning to do it for the next CSC Games. Let's say Jamaica has a team going to CSC Games, hundreds of athletes. Usually the teams for CSC Games are big, multiple sports, but the number of reporters covering the event might be 2 or 3. It is going to be physically impossible for the reporters from Jamaica to be in every single place at every single time. So what the organization, this is the event holder now, does is provide all of these various outlets, do all of the interviews, etc. So then that even while you are at track and field and swimming is going on, you can still access the swimming content after the fact. So organizations now are making the job for journalists even easier. And for most major events, you have what is called the Operations Broadcast Center or the main media center. It has different names depending on the event, where it's basically a media center where you have access to every single event that might be happening simultaneously. So essentially you could sit in front of a computer and cover an Olympic Games or cover a Pan Am Games without leaving the main media center, because the organization now has provided all of those different streams, access to interviews. There's a photo hub, so you log on and get access to all of the images if you don't have a photographer with you. So really organizations are looking for ways to make journalists' job as easy as possible, because it means, you know, the better the coverage will be. This is just an example of the type of events that could have a communications element, even though it's not a mainstream sporting event. So Fenty had a influencer trip in Barbados, not last month in front. And, you know, it's a beauty brand, but this was a Fenty Puma collab. So obviously there was a sport element to it. So most of the influencer activities were based around sport. So this particular event was at the Usain Bolt Sports Complex at the University of the West Indies here in Barbados. So not a pure example of communicating about sport, but what we talk about, you know, communicating through sport, using sport, in this case, both Fenty and Puma, because they played like football and they played a lot of different things. And the national football team, the junior team came, and there was a lot of interaction and that kind of stuff. Using sport to basically communicate, in this case, a product, because they were launching a new line of the Puma slide and one of the other shoes as well. Yes, Sharika Jackson was there, and I think Cherokee was also here as well in terms of Jamaican athletes. Yeah, she scored a goal. So another example of how, you know, communications and sport can intertwine outside of, you know, mainstream media. Then quickly moving ahead, Brian, I think you had asked about things that overlap, and this is another trend we're seeing now, this field of integrated marketing communications in sport, where marketing and communications now are basically hugging up like a couple, and there's a lot of overlap. So communications activities involved in branding, involved in advertising, sponsorship. A lot of work is being done now with influencers, especially, and athlete endorsers. But for those of you who might be tech savvy, the world of augmented reality, virtual reality, and AI is huge, especially in professional sport. The NBA, the NFL in particular, have been embracing it so much, where you have augmented reality broadcasts. I don't know if any of you follow the NFL and saw the Nickelodeon broadcast of the games, which featured SpongeBob and Dora, etc., carrying the commentary for the games to appeal to a younger demographic. And in that commentary, so you have the regular games feed, but it is enhanced for a much younger audience, and it includes a lot of explanations about how the game is played, directly communicating to a younger fan, because the NFL has realized, hey, our fan base is aging. We need to get more fans into the game. How can we do that? By finding them where they are. So those games are broadcast on the Nickelodeon channel, and it is very interactive, very engaging. And what it also does, it ticks another box, because, you know, people say when you have a young child in the household, they tend to monopolize the television. So you end up watching Miss Rachel and all of these little things. But now, as an adult in the household still wanting to watch football, you can watch football, but it is in a format that also engages the children who might be in the room as well. Yes, the NBA did one with Disney for Christmas. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg as it relates to augmented reality, virtual reality, and so forth. So for anybody who's tech savvy, especially in the Caribbean, when that area is very untapped, there's a lot of scope for growth and development there. So definitely something to look into. So then quickly, as we wrap up, just to give you a sense of the types of jobs you can get in sport communication. And I just pulled some examples from some of the highest level of sport, but for each head title, there will be several people under them. So just bear that in mind. There will be a director, a manager, a coordinator, an officer, etc. So a plethora of roles. But before we get into that, we can even start small. Your sports team, your sports club, your national federation might have a public relations officer, a PRO. This is where a lot of us can start if we're interested in getting into sport communications, handling the PR for an individual team or a club or an organization that is of that nature. But some of the jobs, you can work for a professional sports league, you can work for an individual sports team, then it might be something for a major event like an Olympics or a World Cup or a Cricket World Cup. All of these areas will have different communications role. And the job titles, communications is one of those areas where you can have a lot of ways to say the same thing. That's what communicators are good at, saying the same thing in many different ways. So you could be a public relations officer, a communications coordinator, a sport information officer. You tend to find those in the university settings, especially in the US and North America, where NCAA is big business. Most universities have in-house communication departments, and these information officers are responsible for ensuring that accurate information about these university sports teams are communicated to the media. Then you might have a media relations specialist, a media manager, a media liaison, a public relations manager, a social media manager, then corporate communications, who might handle the business side of things for the organization and not so much the player side of things, because that might be handled by a player relations manager. Then there's a stakeholder engagement coordinator, crisis communication specialist. So this is just to show you that, the list can go on and on and on. So some examples here: World Athletics, Director of Communications, CONCACAF, PR and Communications Supervisor. So these are all governing bodies or world/regional governing bodies. Then from an MBA perspective, you have MBA communications. So the MBA has a specific communications arm that handles all of their communications, and they tend to work closely with the individual communications arms of the individual teams as well. And speaking of teams, so in a football context, City Football Group, as an overarching company, will have a communications manager, but then each individual team under that group, so Manchester City, et cetera, will have their own communications departments. So there are lots of roles and layers to be occupied. Then it might not even be mainstream sport, but it might be sport adjacent. So for the FIFA Museum and the IOC Olympic Museum as well, those will have dedicated communication staff who will deal specifically with things related to the museum. And then there's the agency world. So CAA started out as this is Creative Artists Agency, started out as an agency for artists, singers, etc. But they've now branched out exponentially and they have a sports arm. So a lot of athletes are actually signed to the sport agency arm of CAA, and there are communications roles that relate to the sport specific arm of this agency as well. You might be functioning as a publicist and so forth. And then, as I mentioned, sport information happens in a lot of universities. And then for global tournaments, Spooner, who you saw in one of the earlier photos, he was actually the global media manager for the ICC World T20 that just happened in the Caribbean last year. So lots of roles, whether locally, regionally, or internationally. So the sky is really the limit. You're not limited in any form or fashion. But then, as one of you mentioned, there is scope for creating your own entity or your own organization. And what you have now is a lot of firms and companies that are starting up that are specializing in sport communications. So they basically say, as an organization, you might not be able to do it for yourself, but pay us and we will handle all of this for you. So one of the popular companies is Pierce International in the UK. They handle broadcast operations and media relations for a lot of major tournaments. So they've done the Euros, they've done World Championships, they've done World Indoors, etc. So as a company, they basically run all of the media operations on behalf of the organization. So you can essentially start your own company and offer this service to sporting organizations in your respective country. And they pay you a fee. And you see it a lot as well when organizations in the Caribbean are hosting regional events. So if you might be hosting the Costa Games or CAC, etc., you might hire a company to manage all of these things for you. So that's another avenue for those of you who might be operationally or entrepreneurially minded. So then a question to you, having seen, pieces and bits of all the things that could encompass sport communication, what skills do you think would be required to tackle any of these roles? What skills would you need to have? And you can put it in the chat or come on the mic.
Well, one thing I think you cannot lose out of is a good grasp of the English or your language and writing.
I love creativity that's coming through. Definitely being creative, being able to think outside the box, especially now because the landscape is so cluttered, or if you're operating in a social media space, what can you do to cut through the noise? What can you do to help your organization, your brand stand out in a sea of everything that exists? So creativity. Somebody wanted to say something?
Storytelling as well.
Definitely storytelling. Knowing what to say and when to say, extremely important, especially in a crisis. Yes, Kamoya, awareness, having an understanding of what is going on, what is happening around you, what are the trends, what are others doing, what could be, a potential problem that you might have to, what's the word I'm looking for? Anticipate. Improvisation and being able to think on your feet is also a skill that communicators need to have, because you might be in the midst of sport. Is a moving environment, especially when you're dealing with live sport. So many things can happen. Something can pop off at any moment. It can be a rogue question in the middle of a news conference, and you might need to jump in to save an athlete from embarrassing themselves. Or it might be, a live setting and something happens. There was at one of the tennis tournaments just this week, in the middle of one of the on-court interviews, the power went out because there was a couple countries in Europe lost power over the past couple of days, and that happened in the middle of the tournament. So there are a lot of things that you need to be able to think on your feet. Relationship building is so important, because a lot of what you do, you're not only trying to build relationships, but you're also trying to maintain relationships. Because sometimes we're very good at establishing those initial connections, but maintaining them over time is where sometimes we fall down. And you see it a lot in the sponsorship world, where we communicate with sponsors. We reach out, before the season starts. We're looking for a sponsor, we get the sponsorship check, and then crickets, no kind of interaction until next season when we want more money. No. You got to build those relationships. You have to, like to talk about, not to get too marketing focused, but that return on investment. You want to engage. So building relationships matters with journalists, with, all of those various stakeholders. In some instances, government. A lot of our organizations rely on government for funding or for subventions. So building those relationships becomes very important. So definitely some good examples there. And this list is by no means exhaustive, but just, something to think about. Writing and editing becomes very important, especially now that we move into a video heavy world. Being able to take pictures, being able to record video are becoming, those multimedia skills are becoming even more important for people who operate in a sport communications environment for an organization. Making a pitch, being able to say to a reporter or a media host, hey, we have these athletes here, they're on the verge of making the national team for the first time ever. I think it will be a really good story. Being able to sell your story, but also being able to manage a story, especially in the context of a crisis. Developing talking points. A lot of your role might actually involve telling other people in your organization what to say. You might be the one writing the speeches. You might be the one doing the PowerPoint presentations, figuring out, okay, what are the important things we want to say for this event, for the next event, for this group, the next group, that kind of stuff. Managing crisis and obviously content creation, a big skill to have in this current environment, not only from an organization perspective, but for those of you who might work with athletes. And we talked about, athletes breaking their own news. Athletes now are not only creating their own content for awareness, but it is a source of revenue for them as well, because content now is premium. Content can be monetized. So good content can be a source of revenue for athletes as well. So that opens up a whole other gamut of possibilities where you're creating content for athletes that they can then use on their various social media channels to be able to monetize and make money outside of, their appearance fees or prize money and so forth. Just quickly then, just a touch on my journey. I started as an intern. The very grainy photo on the left is from many years ago. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago because I'm not dating myself. But I always knew I wanted to be a sports reporter. So that's my background. I was a sports reporter before. I always knew I wanted to be a sports reporter. So I went to community college and university to do journalism. I started as an intern for the media company, the television company, way more than 15 years ago, actually. Well, I started as an intern. Then after my studies, I came back and worked full-time for that organization in radio and television, and also did some freelancing for Flow Sports, who are based in Trinidad at the time. So that's the last picture for Flow Sports. But then I kind of wanted to transition away from journalism into sport communication, because what I found as a journalist, you cover the stories, you cover the organization, and you start to see where the gaps are, and you kind of want to help fill those gaps, help prepare our athletes better, help prepare our organizations better, help our organizations to do a better job at creating their own image, crafting their own messaging. So I started to lean toward sport communication. I actually volunteered with the Olympic Association in Barbados, as well as in Trinidad, because I was in Trinidad for a while. So I worked with those two organizations, as well as the Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Organization. I started to volunteer doing their social media as well. Incidentally, that actually led to my full-time career, because when they then had a vacancy for a communications manager, I applied for the vacancy and was successful. But in the middle of that, the top picture there, during COVID, my friends and I, we started a sports show because we wanted something to do, and we had time. So for those who might be thinking about creating their own content, you can create your own shows and even then pitch your show to a mainstream media house to generate revenue for yourself or operate in the social media space. The interview we did there, that's actually an NBA player, Terrence Mann. He came on the show. He was with the Clippers at the time, but he's now with the Atlanta Hawks. His mother is St. Lucian. So that's how we got him to come on the show as Caribbean people. I still dabble in broadcasts a little bit, but now my role involves creating content for my organization, writing the news releases, prepping the speeches, the presentations. Because my day job is in anti-doping, a lot of our communication work is actually based in education, doing athlete education, doing engagement with athletes to help them to understand the dangers of doping, what to avoid. So depending on the type of organization you operate in, your communications work might be a lot of in-house stuff catering to a particular stakeholder group. And I still freelance in broadcast. So that was just a little touch on the path. Doesn't have to be linear. There are many ways to get to the same point. So I know I'm over my time significantly, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Any comments, go right ahead.
Yeah, definitely. For one, first question, what are your thoughts on persons who dabble in all areas of, from social media management to sports communication, like all those niches within these two main areas?
Yeah, I'll just stop sharing for a moment. Right. Honestly, I don't have a problem with it because I am kind of like a person who dabbles in all areas because I do social media for certain organizations. I do sport communications as my day job. I do a lot of, training and working with athletes, etc. But I I teach sport communications, but I also do broadcasts and some freelance journalism. I don't necessarily have a problem with it once you can manage it. But I think sometimes, especially if you're now starting out, it might be good to try multiple things to see what you like best. Because sometimes is a difficult balance because what you like best might not be what you're best at. So sometimes then you have to decide, okay, I really like X, but I realize I'm better at Y. And you might find circumstances kind of pushing you in that direction. But if you get a sense of, sometimes you won't know that you like it until you're in it. So I would never necessarily discourage somebody from trying all of the different areas. And because we were moving in a truly multimedia age, if you think about agencies and companies that specialize in sport communications, they're often one-stop agency. So an agency where you can get everything, all the services covered. So they will offer social media management, they will offer videography, photography, interviewing, training, etc. So that's kind of more like the agency model. And starting out as an individual, you might decide, okay, you know what? I'm going to offer all of these services. So I say if you can manage it, go for it. Try it, see what you like, see what you're best at, and go from there.
Yeah,
Right.
lovely answer.
Oh,
Next question is, how do you know what to charge? Like as a beginner, a semi-professional, and a professional. Like what goes behind the pricing of your work?
Mhm. That is a question that
that's
a
a whole.
freelancer
That's
in,
a
yes, that in any industry, not only communications, will have difficulty assessing. But some of the things to consider: one, your level of experience. Unfortunately, as a beginner, you will have to charge less than a seasoned professional. So you can start there. So your level of experience, you're going to consider the level of time investment as well. So what people sometimes do, okay, you know what, if I was working in a mainstream job, I might be getting, I'll use Barbados dollars, I might be getting $15-20 an hour. This job will take me X amount of hours to do. So therefore my rate will be 15 by 5 or what have you. So it might be the level of expertise, the amount of time it will take you, the level of investment that you've made. So the videographers and photographers will tell you they factor in the prices of their equipment into their prices. You might also have to consider whether it is a one-off scenario versus repeat business. So if you're just doing one thing for this person one-off, you might charge one price. But if you're trying to have the person on as a repeat long-term customer, you might offer, an initial discount or a discount for X amount of, I don't know, graphics in a series, etc. So there are a lot of different factors. Do not underestimate the power of volunteering as well. I know in this day and age, nobody want to work for free. But what I will say is choose the organizations that you volunteer with very carefully because they can lead to money in the long run. So yes, at first, volunteering might seem like, man, I ain't doing the work for free. But what you can do is to maximize your volunteering, to make contacts, to expand your network, to get to know people, to get to show people your work. Because sometimes if people don't know you, they can't necessarily want to work with you because they don't know you. And sometimes by volunteering, that is how they get to know you. And for me, like, it is through volunteering that I kind of end up in most of my my sport related jobs if I think about it. So while you try to build out, I would say, start volunteering, or you would find sometimes, especially for content creation, there might be an athlete that you're really keen on, you know, develop a video reel, etc. for them for free. Other people like this, and then you're able to charge. So that was a real roundabout way of saying it depends.
All right, guys, I'm very sorry. Just these are just some 3 questions that I wrote down. I guess this question will be for everyone. How valuable is this skill set? Like everyone
Ooh.
must want to know, like how valuable is our skill set? Like the skill set that we're looking, either we are into already or we're looking to be a part of.
I would say whether journalism, sport communication, it is an extremely valuable skill set simply because a lot of it is grounded on what we call transferable skills, skills that can be applied to any industry. In any industry that you go into, you might have to write, you have to talk, you have to make presentations, whether business, finance, engineering, it doesn't matter. So being able to write in a way that people can understand, being able to deliver in a way that people can understand, are skills that can take you across any industry that you can think about. And you will find that for career transitions, people who are former journalists or former public relations professionals can easily fit into almost any other career field. Also, too, you will find that communications generally is a role that can be applied to any industry, health, commerce, whatever you can think about. There is a communications element to it. And in some cases, there's a sport element to it too. So I would say definitely invaluable.
I love that. Thanks, Riley, for asking that question. Brian, you have your hand up. You have a question to ask as well.
When you had a slide about how marketing and sports communication relate. I saw data analysis in the subset. I was just wondering if you could explain how they integrate a little more.
So we live in right now, these saying used to be content is king. Now data is king. Data is where the money is at. And data analytics plays out a lot in sport in different ways. So firstly, in terms of the performance sphere, so a lot of data is being collected from athletes' performance. You see like the type of bras the footballers are wearing now, like looks like a sports bra, but that's really, technology that's collecting data on heart rate, oxygen levels, etc. All of that data is being compiled, but the data also has to be extrapolated and then translated into a form that makes sense for others. So that's a part of data analytics from the sport performance side of things. From a social media perspective, again, data is key. So the things that matter now are the likes, the views, the reach, etc. Being able to contextualize things, because that's the kind of things, that's what helps you to get money. When sponsors are talking about, thinking about sponsor you, and you can show, well, hold on, by sponsoring our team, our league, our social media reach is that one mention has the possibility to reach 10,000 eyes or 100,000 eyes. So having that data in a very concrete form, the organization can then use it to their advantage. There's another side of data analytics, and this is in the data visualization space. So we're no longer living with just static graphics. A lot of this stuff is moving. So like sometimes, I don't know if you've ever seen it, when when they track the changes of the Premier League table over the season, and you see the teams moving up, moving down, etc. Right, that is an example of data visualization, and you can do that with any kind of data. So whether it is tracking attendance levels over the season and being able to represent it in a graphical context, or tracking the history of your club, like to use a concrete sport example, or tracking the performances of a particular athlete. There's so much, like there's no bounds where data can take you, essentially. So for the tech savvy people, data visualization is another area that is right for the picking.
Oh God, I see Riley, your hand is still up, but I figured that was from the previous 3 questions that you asked. I'm gonna
some Manchester United shade in the chat.
This was, I know for me, like probably my favorite presentation so far, and I think it was just so fitting for you to come on, Marsha. I'm not discounting any of the previous ones, but personally, I know this is the industry that I work in, and you just taught me so much about what I'm doing and what I love about sports communication. And I really hope and I believe that many of us, judging by the interaction in the comments, have you've changed perspective on probably what we thought was possible and maybe even what you want to do or be with the skills that you guys are having. But this has been an extremely insightful session for me, and I'm sure for everyone else. You guys can type in the group or you can talk if you have anything. I don't know if it was as perspective changing for you guys. You can let us know. And I think we're gonna put out a survey since this is our last session. We want to find out from you guys, you know, how much you think you benefited from the program, which sessions were the most beneficial, if there are topics that we're missing that you think that we should include for the next round. And of course, Marsha, the presentation and everything was like just so professional. Really, really, really appreciate it. Brian is saying it was very insightful. Learned a lot about the media space I didn't consider, and I believe a lot of persons here got that. And I'm happy that it is recorded and it's gonna be up, and those who weren't able to make it will be able to benefit from this. But Marsha, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, guys. So just, you know, some final thoughts from me.
Yes.
Be authentic, you know. That's when it comes to content and communications, authenticity helps to build trust, and trust is what works, so to speak, whether with journalists, with your fan base, with your players, etc. You know, being authentic from an organizational context. In any area you want to do, just practice writing, practice speaking, you know, practice doing your videos, talk in front of the mirror, get comfortable with seeing yourself, get comfortable with hearing your voice, that kind of stuff. Definitely watch sports, and know that you have a different lens. You're going to start to notice certain things as you watch sports. So you're not just watching it as a sport fan now. So you're looking to see, okay, what's happening on the sidelines, what's happening behind the scenes. You're going to pay a little closer attention to those news conferences that might be pre-event and so forth. Find your niche. There are so many untapped areas, especially in the Caribbean, as it relates to sport in general, and sport communication specifically. So I'm sure there are a lot of local teams and even national associations that would be clamoring for somebody to come in and help them run their social media or help them, you know, write a news release. Just give them that communication support. And it could lead to travel, because oftentimes now, especially for some events, you travel with media personnel in-house. So the CRIFTA team might need to travel with a media person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another avenue. If you like travel and like sport, reach out to an organization who's prepping, offer to run their social media pages for them, book your seat on that plane with the team doing content, you know, for that trip. And closely linked with that, then explore all opportunities. The worst thing somebody can tell you is no. And if they tell you no, you're just going to ask somebody else. That's ultimately it. Always explore all opportunities. Google will be your best friend. For those of you who have LinkedIn, doing searches on LinkedIn will also be helpful, because there are also a lot of organizations that run like young reporters programs or junior reporters programs. So like World Athletics has a young reporters program. The IOC has a young reporters program. The International Press Association, the International Sports Press Association, but it isn't in English, so the acronym is AIPF. They also have a young reporters program. And then there are various sporting leagues, etc., that run internships in the US and else places. So you just want to, you know, keep an eye out for what might obtain, and just if you see anything, apply. You never know what will happen. And a lot of you will be familiar with Donald applied to, you know,
Donald Oliver?
Not Oliver, the other Donald. Who does the stadium announcements and stuff?
The skits.
Who does the what's Donald's last name, boy? He's almost like the voice of track and field in
Donald Smith?
stadium. Donald Smith, yes. Oh, Donald was doing commentary, but then he applied to a World Athletics program. You had to record a video of yourself commentating on a race, and he submitted it. And look where he is now, traveling the world, doing in-stadium commentary for world championships. He was at Perth doing in-stadium commentary, etc. So it might seem like a little contest. Enter, try your hand, and see. You never know where it might take you.
Oh wow, we need to have him on the next series.
Yes, Donald will be a good option. Because something as simple as recording himself on his phone, commentating on a race, has opened up a whole new career field for him.
Okay. Man, thank you.
Sorry to take you guys past the time, but I enjoyed your company.
I think it was well spent, and I appreciate every one of you that managed to stick around for the entire session. And it's exam time, or coming up again, so all the best in your exams, guys. I know there's challenges. I think the last challenge will wrap up, I think, within the week. So if you have any questions or any concerns or anything like that, please bring it to us as soon as you can, so that we can be on top of things. And you will hear about what we're doing next after this. I already have, to be discussed, but like, not if it's not a program during the summer, something that can keep us engaged and keep us going until the next semester. And I want everybody to have the opportunity. All right, well, it's 7:37, so I'm gonna say good night, and everyone who's not home, get home safely. Marsha, be safe over there. Hope you get to visit soon and that we can meet in person.
Yes, it's been a while since I made it to Jamaica, so I need to come back.
Yes. Everyone else, thanks again for sticking with us throughout the entire session. This is our seventh and final session for this series. So look out for more emails and messaging from us about what's next. And please, if you want to write to us, any recommendations, any suggestions for the program, or any next steps for people who have done the program and you want us to do something for you, I would love to hear about myself and Jessica. Okay, so it's not goodbye. See you later. Thank you. Thanks, guys.